Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would have a little short conversation with you guys and overall talk about this because I think it's somewhat interesting to talk about and I think that it is important to talk about. So, let's get into this conversation. So, anyway, when it comes down to it, I ended up releasing probably a few videos over the past couple of weeks over a topic about a certain fighter by the name of Jermall Charlo. Now, if you know anything about the boxing world as of recent, you know that Jermall Charlo, he called out certain fighters, especially by one fighter by the name of David Benavidez, I believe about a year ago, and then he recently said some more stuff about him, but that's not the only super middleweight fighter that he commented on. He also commented on a fighter by the name of Caleb Plant, who I believe is the IBF super middleweight champion right now, and Canelo most likely will be going after him later on this year or the latter portion of this year. So we'll see what happens with that fight. I think that's a great fight. But I've recently released videos on Jermall Charlo because I don't think that there's a certain amount of people really releasing videos on the way that Jermall Charlo, in my opinion, is maneuvering around certain fighters. And a lot of the mainstream boxing channels that you're going to see out there are a part of the LDBC and are a part of new media. So channels like Dante's Boxing Nation, Aki TV, Boxing Eagle, Blue Blood Sports TV, and this is a graphic of Blue Blood Sports TV right here. I ended up reviewing this video today, and I was wondering what the response was going to be from new media and from the LDBC when they heard about Jermall Charlo's next fight, who is pretty much against a no-name. I mean, some of you may know Juan Macias Montiel. He's fought a couple of notable fighters. He did just recently defeat James Kirkland, but let's just be real, no one thinks that this is an A-grade fight. And out of all the recent fights that were scheduled, especially on the Showtime schedule, this was looked at as the weakest bout, hands down. And the LDBC and new media, they basically just tried to brush us under the rug. And the reason why I have such a big problem with this is because these channels have no problem trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez's name. They have no problem trying to tear down a Gennady Golovkin or a Vasyl Lomachenko or a Teofimo Lopez. Basically what I'm trying to say here, they have no problem trying to tear down other demographics. But when it comes to their own demographic, when it comes to the American black fighters, all of a sudden their energy changes. And you notice that with their channels. Once again, for the certain amount of people that don't believe me, when you take a look at their agendas, when you take a look at their propaganda, at their objectives, they are very pro-racial. But I was wondering what their response was going to be because I asked a question with his most recent fight being set up. Where was new media? Where was the LDBC? And when are they going to comment on this? Well, apparently, and this is not the only person that I've seen comment on this, Blue Blood Sports TV recently commented on this, but their excuse, at least for why Jermall Charlo would be facing a Juan Macias Montiel next, is because, first of all, apparently he's been on this long layoff ever since September, and you don't really expect him to go in there with an elite opponent next, do you? And all this are bull crap. Personally, I'm not buying it, but it is what it is. But what I heard, at least from Blue Blood Sports TV in this recent video, he believes, and even he had to admit, and Dante's Boxing Nation, I heard him admit this a little bit as well, even they finally have to admit that Jermall Charlo was not serious about facing these 168-pounders, or at least facing a David Benavidez. Even they had to admit that, but what you'll notice is that in these videos, in the same videos, they'll have no problem alleging that Canelo Alvarez, or they'll have no problem saying that Canelo Alvarez is maneuvering or taking the easy way out, is ducking certain fighters. They'll have no problem saying that about Golovkin or a certain amount of these other demographics. But then when it comes to Jermall Charlo, even when it looks like he is not serious about a certain amount of these fights, including a fight that now I'm hearing is possible against Demetrius Andrade, you notice that in these videos, they're not going to say specifically that Jermall Charlo is ducking or maneuvering around these fighters, even though he very clearly is. Because Jermall Charlo, every middleweight fight that he has had, has really been a tune-up fight, whether people like to admit that or not. It is what it is. But what I'm hearing now, and I had a feeling they were going to use this as an excuse, but we'll see if it comes to fruition. Blue Blood Sports TV said that he believes a Demetrius Andrade versus Jermall Charlo fight could possibly happen. Apparently, Demetrius Andrade could be willing to sign with Showtime and the PBC in order to possibly get that Jermall Charlo fight, and that he would be willing to accept that he is the B-side in that promotion, which I think would be a great deal if that's the truth. But here's the question I wanted to ask you guys. Do you think that this is a fight likely to happen? Even if possibly Demetrius Andrade does sign with the PBC? And that's another question entirely. Is Demetrius Andrade really going to sign with the PBC? Because personally, I have not heard Demetrius Andrade talk about this recently. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I could be incorrect, So it is what it is. But when it comes down to it, I personally have not heard any news on this. So I'm not sure where these sources are coming from. To be honest with you, what I personally believe that it's wishful thinking. But basically what some of them are saying is the excuse for him fighting Juan Macias, whatever the fuck his name is, Montiel next. Juan Macias Montiel. The reason for him facing him next is basically for a tune-up fight to possibly get in line to face Demetrius Andrade, who apparently is going to go over to Showtime or the PBC, decide that he's the B-side to face Jermall Charlo, and possibly get that big fight. Now, if Demetrius Andrade actually did do that, that would show me that he's obviously taking big strides and is really trying to get an A-class fight. And once again, I would have to give him major props for that. But how likely is that to actually happen? It sounds somewhat unlikely, but we'll see what happens. Maybe it'll happen. I don't know. And that'll be interesting because Jermall Charlo, really, if Demetrius Andrade does do that, he'll really have no choice but to take the Demetrius Andrade fight, or the other choice will basically to be eaten alive by a certain amount of the fan base. So it is what it is. We'll see what happens. And new media and the LDBC, they're not going to get on Jermall Charlo. They're not going to make a video about it until that happens. Even though Jermall Charlo is very clearly maneuvering and ducking a certain amount of these contenders. Now, once again, they have no problem saying this with Canelo. They have no problem saying this with Gennady Golovkin. They have no problem saying this with the certain fighters that they don't like. But when it comes to a Jermall Charlo or a Demetrius Andrade possibly turning down some fights, you notice they're very quiet about it. You notice not very many videos on this. But apparently this is what their excuse is. This is what they have to say. That this is apparently in line to get a Demetrius Andrade fight. Well, if their sources are true, and a lot of the times, usually they're not. But we'll see what happens. When it comes down to the overall, we'll just have to see what happens. Do you think that this fight is likely to happen within the next year? Because according to the LDBC and new media, at least from what some of the rumors that I've heard and some of the wishful thinking, in my opinion, that they're trying to pose. Now, who knows? Maybe this is completely realistic. And I hope that it is, because I would personally love to see a Jermall Charlo versus a Demetrius Andrade fight. I think that them fighting each other really would boost, their image and would possibly get them a Canelo Alvarez fight. So who knows? That might be the fight that they need to possibly get Canelo or some of these other big fights. It would push their image and make them more prolific for sure, without a doubt. But how serious are they about taking this fight? And how serious is Jermall Charlo about taking a Demetrius Andrade fight? Because as we know, Jermall Charlo is not serious about taking on a lot of these top contenders. And in my opinion, is Jermall Charlo serious about taking a Demetrius Andrade fight? Without a doubt, he is not serious about taking a Demetrius Andrade fight. But the interesting thing about this is that if what Blue Blood Sports TV said is true, if what he said is true, he basically will have no choice. He will be backed into a corner so badly that Demetrius Andrade overall and Charlo will basically be forced to fight each other. But it'll be very interesting. That's a lot of wishful thinking in my opinion, but that's basically what they said. Now, we'll see if that ends up happening. Personally, that seems a little bit too good to be true. But I just thought that I would put that out there because that's what their new excuses are. That's basically what they're saying. They believe, and I think that it's wishful thinking. I think they're down on their knees praying that a Demetrius Andrade and Jermall Charlo fight will happen within the next year. So if their sources are correct, if they are factual, we will see a Jermall Charlo versus Demetrius Andrade fight within the next year. Personally, I don't think Jermall Charlo has ever been serious about facing a Demetrius Andrade, and even if that fight were to happen within the next year, they still should be mentioning how Demetrius Andrade was avoided by Jermall Charlo, just like they were mentioning Canelo Alvarez, just like they were mentioning Gennady Golovkin. Okay? So it is what it is, but once again, you're not going to hear them say that, but it is what it is. You have to be objective, you have to keep the same energy towards everybody, but they're not going to do that. But here's the question I wanted to ask you guys. Do you believe that this is actually something logical? Do you believe that this fight actually, could come to fruition within the next year? Tell me what you think the chances are of this fight possibly happening. Do you trust the sources that the LDBC have, or do you think that it's just wishful thinking? Because if I had to guess, I would say that it's more likely the latter. But we'll see what happens. It'll be very, very interesting. But I noticed that there's a couple of channels now coming out with this narrative. So don't be surprised if a couple of them say, well, Jermall Charlo wants to stay at 160 because he wants to fight with Demetrius Andrade. Even though in the past he has never shown any interest in fighting a Demetrius Andrade and has been very clearly not interested in facing a Demetrius Andrade. And also recently he said that he's not a 168-pounder, so very obviously is not interested in facing a Caleb Plant or a David Benavidez either, even though he said that he would knock those guys out. So it is what it is. Once again, Jermall Charlo, it's very clear to me that he's not serious in facing a certain amount of these top contenders. But let's say that Blue Blood Sports TV is right, and his sources are correct, and his guesses are correct. We'll see what happens. Jermall Charlo might be backed into a corner. So I hope that this fight actually does come to fruition. If I had to guess, it probably won't. But just let me know what you guys think on it. That's pretty much all the news I have for now. But thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.